This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A federal judge today ordered former Trump attorney and New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani to turn over several of his valuable possessions to two former Georgia election workers. Federal Judge Louis Lehman ordered Giuliani to hand over several items, including jewelry and his Manhattan penthouse apartment, to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. The mother and daughter, who counted Georgia ballots in 2020, won a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against the former mayor in 2023. The court's ruling today marks the former poll worker's latest efforts to have the judgment enforced. The women will also be entitled to about $2 million in legal fees, which Giuliani has said the Trump campaign still owes him. Giuliani must turn over his interest in the property in 7 days to a receivership the women will control. Former President Trump is holding campaign events up and down the country today. He was down in Florida at a Latino summit, then in the swing state of North Carolina for the second day in a row. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Former President Donald Trump participated in a roundtable at the Latino summit in Doral, Florida, just half an hour west of Miami. He said that his over 50-day streak of holding campaign events across the country is paying off, especially with Latino voters. Here's Trump Tuesday morning.
I just saw a poll that we're actually leading with Hispanics. That's never happened before.
I actually think that the biggest thing is the border, because the border is destroying our country. It's really destroying.
Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, rallied in Arizona on Tuesday, voicing similar sentiment to the surge in illegal immigration and the subsequent drug trafficking at the southern border.
It is not compassionate to open the border and allow the Mexican drug cartels to get rich by selling poison to our citizens. It is not compassionate to allow the Mexican drug cartels to sex traffic children into the United States of America, and it is not compassionate to allow hundreds of thousands of American citizens to die of fentanyl overdoses.
Trump will hold a rally on Tuesday night in the city of Greensboro, North Carolina. It's the second consecutive day in the swing state, which was hit hard by Hurricane Helene. This comes a day after former President Trump stopped by a Pennsylvania McDonald's to hand out French fries to customers. It was an apparent mocking of Harris, saying she lied in 2019 by claiming she worked at McDonald's. The Harris campaign says that Trump's team hasn't proven that she wasn't an employee. But the controversy takes place in Pennsylvania, a critical swing state that could decide the election. It's the nation's largest battleground state with 19 electoral college votes. Both Trump and Harris have invested more money, energy, and time in Pennsylvania than any other state. The winners of the last two presidential races have been reflected in Pennsylvania, and it was by just tens of thousands of votes. And polls continue to show a tight race here. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Former President Obama joins Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, in battleground Wisconsin. The team is urging people to get out and cast their ballots on the first day of early voting in the state. NTD national correspondent Jason Blair brings us the latest.
Democratic vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz and former President Obama have a strong message to thousands at the Alliant Energy Center in Madison, Wisconsin.
Tim will be an outstanding vice president, but he's only going to be an outstanding vice president if you vote. And that's why you're here today.
It's the first day of early voting in the state. Madison and Dane County are strongholds for the Democrats, and voter turnout is a big focus for both candidates, with poll averages showing a tight race.
This thing's close. We're still the underdogs in this, and we know we're going to leave it all on the field. Wisconsin, you got same-day voter registration, and it's open today to get there and vote.
Obama is also scheduled to join Vice President Harris at a rally in Atlanta, Georgia on Thursday. It's also reported that Harris will be holding a rally in the Republican stronghold of Texas on Friday. According to the campaign, she'll be highlighting her stance on abortion, looking to rope in as many moderate voters as she can using publicity from the event. Texas is one of the most restrictive states in the country on abortion. Harris also sat down with NBC for an interview that aired Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, as well as Telemundo for a talk that's scheduled to air Wednesday night. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Visiting the purple state of New Hampshire, President Biden touted his administration's efforts in lowering drug prices while urging voters to vote for Vice President Harris. But President Trump has criticized the law that Biden says has benefited millions of Americans. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
President Biden, speaking in New Hampshire, highlights his administration's efforts to lower drug prices. He points to new data showing seniors have saved nearly $1 billion from prescription drug price caps under the Inflation Reduction Act. The law signed by Biden in 2022 limits out-of-pocket drug costs for some Medicare recipients to about $3,500 per year. Next year, that cap drops to $2,000.
Some of the cancer drugs can cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year. It'll go down to $2,000. Not have to pay more than $2,000, no matter what the cost of the drugs are.
The trip comes as Biden is seeking to burnish his legacy before leaving office. He's been doing quite some official White House events in different states to tout the administration's record, but has relatively few traditional campaign events with or explicitly for Vice President Harris. Meanwhile, Biden said on Tuesday,
if we don't elect Kamala and he gets elected, Trump can kick up to 45 million people off their health insurance. 45 million! Trump and MAGA Republicans want to eliminate the Inflation Reduction Act, which you're talking about, the big bill.
Harris on Tuesday emphasized her role in the administration's work, saying in a statement she was proud to cast a tie-breaking vote in passing the Inflation Reduction Act. But former President Trump has been criticizing the law, saying its massive spending has only led to more inflation. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Russia is behind the spread of false content against vice presidential nominee Tim Walz. That's according to a U.S. intelligence official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The content went viral on social media last week. It included fake videos alleging Walz's abusive behavior with students when he was a teacher and a football coach. The officials said the video showed multiple manipulation tactics consistent with the Kremlin's influence operations. With Election Day just around the corner, officials warn that U.S. adversaries will intensify their efforts to divide Americans. Is the Russia-Ukraine war going global? Reports suggest both North and South Korea could be sending military personnel to Europe. That's as Russian President Vladimir Putin is strengthening ties today with Communist China. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest.
The BRICS coalition is holding a summit in Russia on Tuesday. Leaders from countries such as China, Iran, Venezuela and others are gathering to strengthen ties with each other. Chinese leader Xi Jinping arrived in Russia's Kazan region on Tuesday. Russian President Vladimir Putin is using the BRICS summit to increase relations with the Chinese communist regime, calling Xi his dear friend.
I would like to once again congratulate you, dear friend, this time in person, for the 75th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China.
In May, Xi and Putin pledged a new era of partnership. The two nations are the most powerful rivals of the United States. Russia often claims the US is at fault for rising tensions between East and West. The State Department on Tuesday suggested that the US isn't looking for conflict with BRICS member nations, including China.
When it comes to China, our goal and our intent is to continue to manage that relationship and manage that relationship responsibly.
And South Korea accuses North Korea of sending 1,500 troops to fight for Russia against Ukraine. NATO says that South Korean experts will brief the alliance on the issue next week. According to the NATO chief, this way they'll find out if North Korea is really sending troops to Russia.
If that would be the case, if they would be sending troops to Ukraine, that would mark a significant escalation.
A Korean journalist asked the State Department about reports that South Korea might send military personnel to Ukraine to counter North Korea's involvement. The spokesperson didn't comment directly, but suggested that the conflict in Ukraine now has a global impact.
The whole world, not just Europe, not just NATO allies, see the threat and the dangerousness and the recklessness from Russian action.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the country's prosecutor general is resigning in the wake of a domestic scandal. Dozens of officials are accused of abusing their positions to receive disability status and avoid military service. President Volodymyr Zelensky had previously called for accountability amid the scandal. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Britain and the EU have approved their shares of a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, which seeks to give additional military support to the war-torn nation. It'll be funded by the profits made on Russian assets sanctioned in the West. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has the story from London.
Britain will lend Ukraine $2.9 billion as part of a $50 billion loan from the Group of Seven, or G7 nations. It will be funded by profits made on frozen Russian central bank assets and will help buy weapons for Ukraine as well as rebuild damaged infrastructure. British Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced the UK's contribution.
So this will ensure that Russian assets frozen in Europe, that the extraordinary profits on that will be used to help fund the war effort in Ukraine.
She said Ukraine is on the front line of Russian aggression, but they are defending all of Europe. British Defence Secretary John Healey said the loan will use Russian money against Russia.
Billions more pounds in loans for Ukraine, using the corrupt money from Putin's own regime against him and putting it in the hands of Ukrainians to fight for their freedom.
Healey said the money donated by Britain would be solely for Ukraine's military and could be used to help develop drones capable of travelling further than some long-range missiles. European Union lawmakers on Tuesday approved the bloc's contribution of $38 billion. The European Parliament voted 518 in favour to 56 against.
And with this vote, we are sending a very strong message that we are using profits from Russian frozen assets for Ukraine, and Russia as an aggressor must and will pay for its destruction. Slava Ukraini.
Russian assets worth around $300 billion were frozen shortly after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The G7 announced the $50 billion loan to Ukraine in June. Russia has repeatedly threatened retaliation to any use of frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine, which it describes as illegal. Talks about the G7 loan are accelerating as Western countries want to secure the funding. It comes amid concerns that if former President Trump wins the US election next month, he could reduce support for Ukraine. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with officials in Israel today to push for a ceasefire. This came as Hezbollah terrorists continue to launch rockets into Israeli territory. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
On Tuesday, sirens rang out in Tel Aviv as rockets flew overhead. There were no immediate reports of casualties as Israel's air defense systems continued to intercept many of the rockets. The Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon launched about 80 rockets at Israel before 3 in the afternoon, according to Israeli forces. This attack came just hours before Secretary of State Antony Blinken landed in Israel to meet with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to push for a ceasefire. According to a statement released by the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu said there needs to be a security and diplomatic change in the north to allow Israeli citizens to return safely to their homes. He also said the recent death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar will likely have a positive influence on returning the hostages who are being held in the Gaza Strip. And on that same day, Hezbollah said there would be no negotiations while fighting with Israel, adding that, quote, "What is not taken by fire is not given with politics." Meanwhile, Israel continues to battle the terrorist group in Lebanon, releasing a video of a member of Hezbollah's elite forces firing at Israeli troops. He then goes inside this building before Israeli forces struck the area. Israel also reported striking a weapons storage facility in Lebanon, as well as Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure, a rocket launcher, and a Hezbollah operations room. And Israel has recently been targeting Hezbollah's financial network, striking nearly 30 financial institutions in Lebanon that it says were financing Hezbollah's terrorist activity. IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari explained how Iran funnels money to the terrorist group in Lebanon.
Iran's Quds forces transfer money to Hezbollah from Iranian oil sold in Syria. Iran also sends suitcases of cash and gold by planes to the Iranian embassy in Beirut, and then directly it goes to Hezbollah.
Haggari also said that Israel discovered that Hezbollah's late former leader, Hassan Nasrallah, had hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and gold stashed in a bunker underneath a hospital in Beirut. He explained that the bunker had rooms and beds and infrastructure for long stays, with the ability to direct combat from underground. Haggari said that Israel will not strike the compound and that the Israeli Air Force is monitoring it. He also called on the Lebanese government and international organizations to not allow Hezbollah to use the money to fund terror or attacks against Israel. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Israel has been planning to respond to the Iranian regime following its missile attack earlier this month. The FBI announced today it is investigating the public disclosure of highly classified intelligence documents describing Israel's preparations for the retaliatory strike. The documents appear to have been prepared by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. They describe U.S. interpretations of Israeli Air Force and Navy planning. The pair of documents began circulating last week on the Telegram messaging app. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Joining us now at the Election Data Hub is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, today is the start of early in-person voting in Wisconsin, a crucial swing state for this election. How are the polls looking right now?
Thank you, Tiff. Yeah, very close. 10 electoral votes here up for grabs in the state. Really, Trump and Harris have really been back and forth here over the last couple of months. Let's go ahead and take a look at a recent poll here. Now, this is according to Rasmussen Reports, dated just earlier this month here. So you can see Donald Trump, a slight 49-47 lead in the state of Wisconsin here. Now, that 2-point lead he's got, though, is within the 3% margin of error. Now, if we rewind 4 years, let's look at 2020. Joe Biden won the state over Trump by just half a percentage point. That equates to approximately 20,000 votes. But according to the poll I just showed you, Trump has made up that margin and then some. So, of course, the question is, how's he done it? Where's he finding these voters? Let's go ahead and take a look at some demographics here, starting with race. Let's look at black voters in the state of Wisconsin. Now, these margins here, down here, these are the Democratic nominee versus Donald Trump. Now, in 2016, Trump won the state over Hillary Clinton, despite Clinton having an 86-point lead over Trump among black voters. Now in 2020, Biden pretty much maintained that an 84-point advantage when he won. But then look at this. According to the polls in 2024, Kamala Harris down to just an 18-point advantage among black voters in the state. That is a 66-point bump, if you will, for Donald Trump. It equates to approximately 125,000 votes away here from Kamala Harris. Let's take a look at white voters in this state here now, too. They make up 89% of the eligible voters in the state. Again, these margins are Trump versus the Democratic nominee. Now, in 2016, he had an 11-point lead over Hillary Clinton among white voters. That was down to six points in 2020 against Joe Biden. And look at this, actually. 2024, he's down to a 4-point lead over Kamala Harris. Now that's actually a 60-point sway here actually for Kamala Harris among white voters here. Now we've looked at race real quickly. Let's look at gender here, starting with the women in the state of Wisconsin. Female voters, again, these margins, Democratic nominee versus Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton held a 10-point lead over Trump with women in the state. Biden increased that to 13 in 2020. But now, according to the polls in 2024, Harris has mostly maintained that, but even this little 1% drop equates to approximately 15,000 votes in the state. How about the men? Male voters in the state of Wisconsin. Again, these margins here are Trump versus the Democratic nominee. In 2016, he had a 14-point advantage over Hillary Clinton. That was down to 10 in 2020 over Biden, but back up to 15 here over Kamala Harris. Now, this is actually an 80,000 vote bump here for Donald Trump. Now, the question also was posed on this Rasmussen report to these voters: which issue should the next president address first? In looking for why Trump is gaining here. Among Wisconsin voters, surprisingly, number one, illegal immigration. Now, this has actually been rising for a few years. Rarely, though, has it been above prices or the economy, which is actually number two. But these two issues here generally favor Donald Trump. Meanwhile, these third and fourth issues, protecting our democracy and abortion rights, generally favor Kamala Harris. So, Tiff, it's kind of similar to what we saw yesterday in Michigan. You know, these small bumps have really big effects on a toss-up state like Wisconsin. Back to you at the desk.
All right, Dave, as always, thanks for that breakdown. And this general election, voters in 41 states will decide to adopt or reject 146 ballot initiatives. Many of these initiatives will impact voter turnout in key battleground states, deciding which party controls the White House and Congress. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Of those 146 ballot initiatives, the states of Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New York, Nevada, and South Dakota have ballot measures that seek state constitutional rights to abortion. In the state of Nebraska, the ballot measure seeks to amend the Constitution to allow abortion until fetal viability. Vice President Kamala Harris and Democrats in down-the-ballot races have been campaigning heavily on this issue.
More than 1 in 3 women lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban. Today, except for Virginia, every state in the South, including Georgia, has a Trump ban.
The stakes of this election, I think about my 19-year-old daughter who's in college. She's a sophomore, and she literally has fewer rights in this moment than her grandmother and mother.
Another ballot initiative that stands out are those related to drug policy used in the 2024 general election. 3 states will decide on the legalization of marijuana. The ballot measure race in the state of Florida has been the most expensive this cycle, with more than $100 million poured into campaigning for and against the legalization of marijuana. And Vice President Kamala Harris has been leaning into the issue to appeal to black men.
And as vice president, have been a champion for bringing marijuana down on the schedule. So instead of it being ranked up there with heroin, we bring it down. And my pledge is, as president, I will work on decriminalizing it, because I know exactly how those laws have been used to disproportionately impact certain populations, and specifically black men.
The Florida Senate race is a toss-up, and it could be impacted by having both abortion and marijuana in the ballot. The same can be said of the presidential race in the state of Arizona and Nevada, both battleground states with abortion in a ballot initiative. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
With the election just 2 weeks away, early voting has kicked off in Wisconsin and Florida. In the battleground state of Wisconsin, in-person absentee voting started today. It will continue until November 3rd. Voters must show a valid photo ID to cast their ballots. Meanwhile, Florida began in-person early voting yesterday across its 67 counties. Over 1 million mail-in ballots have already been returned. Despite some website outages in counties like Broward, voting has not been disrupted. Early voting is underway in other crucial states, including Georgia, Arizona, and North Carolina, with record turnout reported. According to the election lab at the University of Florida, over 19 million ballots have already been cast so far nationwide. They include over 7 million in-person early votes and over 12 million mail ballots. Joining us now to discuss early voting is Gerard Filitti, political strategist, who's also senior counsel at the Lawfare Project. And Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show again. To begin, what do you think accounts for these strong early voting numbers?
A lot of what accounts for these strong numbers is the massive efforts by both parties to get out the vote early. Both the Democratic and the Republican national committees encouraged people to get out the vote quickly. Even the Republican Party adopted more of a stance that was pro-early voting than it has in previous elections. So we're seeing this year the greatest number by far in mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and in-person early voting than in previous elections.
Now, reports note that Republicans are closing the gap in early voting totals among the states that report party affiliation for early voting. Democrats lead Republicans by about 11 percentage points. Compare that to the same time in 2020, when Republicans were trailing by about 27 percentage points. What does this mean for this year's election results?
What this means for the results is that it's still too early to tell. While we know that this is a massive increase in the number of Republican voters who are voting early, that doesn't really tell us what the overall picture will become election day, because remember, these are people who otherwise would have likely voted on election day. So what this really does is, on election day itself, we will have quicker tabulations of the votes, perhaps, because so many votes have already been counted during the process while other people are there voting in person. We don't yet know what this tells us about what the outcomes will be, but what we do know is that Republicans have been much better to embrace this process about early voting and absentee voting and mail-in voting than in previous years. Whether it's enough to make a significant difference in the final outcome, it's too early to tell.
And do you see this enthusiasm or record turnout, if you will, staying through Election Day?
This is certainly an election that is getting people out to vote, and it's something that we've all been talking about for months. But now that we're in the final 2 weeks of the campaign, a lot of people are energized and looking forward to the democratic process every 4 years, casting that vote for president. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. I think that we will see probably this year a record number of voters overall who turn out to vote on election day, more so than at any other election in history. And this really speaks to the attention that people are paying on politics and on everything that's happened in the country in the last 4 years and 8 years.
Now, out of the crucial swing states, let's zoom in on Pennsylvania. Many saying this state is key to winning the White House. Now, both candidates have been campaigning heavily in the Keystone State. How has each campaign done in appealing to voters there?
I think both campaigns have come out strong. Trump has played to his base and played to people who are dissatisfied with the economy and the immigration issue, the border issue, and national security. Kamala Harris has really made an effort to make dents in the Pennsylvania vote by referring to the democratic values that she abides by, especially abortion rights and issues that favor getting women out to vote, to make up a bulwark against the men who tend to come out and vote for the Republican nominee. So both parties have really played strongly to their bases, and we're seeing a very close race. Ultimately, it'll be the last-minute undecided voters who will probably make the difference in either direction.
And on that last part, do we have any indication on how voters are leaning, or is it still effectively tied as polls are showing?
It still is effectively tied within the margin of error. If you look at one poll, you'll see Kamala Harris up by 1 or 2 percentage points. Another poll will show Donald Trump up by 1 or 2. We're effectively in a very similar position as 2016 with Hillary Clinton. When the polls are tight, they suggest that one candidate might have an edge, but we really can't predict what that means on election day. That's how close this race is. And we've also come to be distrustful of a lot of these polls because of the last 2 elections. So as we're now in the home stretch, we're seeing polling solidify. There does seem to be a trend favoring Donald Trump in a lot of these battleground states, but that is something that is very iffy, and anything can change in these last 2 weeks.
And Gerard, we're also seeing election laws changing in multiple states since 2020, which was itself different because of the pandemic. What are some of the most significant changes at the state level this year?
A lot of the changes have to do with how you validate a vote, who can vote, how voter registry is maintained, how voter registry is purged of people who are unqualified to vote. Voter ID laws are a big issue. These are things that are being more enforced in states that tend to lean conservative and have Republicans in office. In other states that lean more Democratic, we are seeing looser enforcement. We're seeing policies that make it easier to cast absentee or off-date votes, make it easier to have votes validated as legitimate. So this is really the key difference. We're seeing laws that are affecting not just how people vote, but how these votes are tabulated, who is allowed to contest and be present for these tabulations, and really the mechanical and boring details that we don't get to see until election night behind the closed doors when the actual voting certification process starts.
Gerard Filitti, political strategist and senior counsel at the Lawfare Project, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
A highly contested presidential election cycle is racing towards the finish line. What are some issues that are driving voters to the polls? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
Who do you think is going to win this election?
It's really confusing how this might shake out, but I'm really hoping for Kamala.
I hope it's Donald Trump.
I have no idea.
Trump.
Petrified. I don't know, but it's going to be a close call.
We're hoping for Harris. We'll see. It's going to be very tight.
and everybody needs to get out and vote.
It's going to be very close. I think Donald Trump is going to win it.
And who has your vote?
Trump. Harris.
Kamala. The conservative ways are more the right way.
Harris.
Everybody feels we need a change. I don't think we can get that with Vice President Harris.
Our entire democracy is at stake for this, and so my vote will always be for Kamala.
What's the one issue that drives you to vote the way you do now?
Because I can't stand Trump.
I want a better life for myself and for my family and kids and grandkids.
My moral conscience. I cannot agree with a lot of the things that Kamala is representing.
I think she's a woman for the people in comparison to her competitor.
I think our national security. She doesn't have the strength and the knowledge of what's going on in the world today.
We fought a hard war to get where we're at. We need to make sure that we don't lose our rights as women.
The southern border, I think, affects our public safety. I think the economy has to be addressed.
I would like to see the economy under Harris. I would like to see, frankly, less of the calamity and less of the chaos under Harris.
The principles of Trump most align with my principles and the policies he has set forward.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch has been arrested on charges related to sex trafficking. Mike Jeffries and 2 other associates were arrested today. The federal indictment alleges they ran a sex trafficking scheme between 2008 and 2015.
Aspiring fashion models knew that a place on one of Abercrombie's iconic ads could be the ticket to success in the modeling industry. But while Jeffries was the CEO of one of the most recognizable clothing retailers in the world, he was using his power, his wealth, and his influence to traffic men for his own sexual pleasure. The message from today's prosecution is clear. Sexually exploiting vulnerable human beings is a crime, and doing so by dangling dreams of a future in fashion or modeling or any other business is no different. My office and our law enforcement partners will always prioritize standing up for victims, no matter their gender and no matter how powerful the wrongdoers think they are. We will hold them to account.
They're accused of recruiting men who wanted to become models, then giving them drugs, alcohol, and Viagra at adult-themed parties. Jeffries and a second defendant made initial court appearances at a Florida federal court this afternoon. A new iPhone feature hides webpage ads, but French trade associations say it's an existential threat to the online advertising model. Here's the story.
Distraction Control, a new iPhone feature that hides web page ads.
Once you tap an item to hide, they just wisp away, like Thanos snapped his fingers.
It's giving a headache to multiple French trade groups. They want Apple to suspend the feature, calling it an existential threat to the online advertising model.
Some businesses are going to get affected more than others, and some businesses are going to go completely out of business because that's what happens whenever you have changes like this. But existential to online advertising, I don't know if that's the correct terminology.
Ad agency owner Renee Lacade says many firms will be fine if they simply move their ads to another platform, such as social media and YouTube. But the businesses that could be hurt are the websites themselves.
When you take away all of their ad revenue and all the actual advertisers move their money off of the websites, these websites fail. And there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these businesses.
The French trade groups say people could stop subscribing to websites as well. Many sites make visitors choose between a paid ad-free browsing experience or a free experience with ads. The trade groups say they're actively considering all available legal resources as they urge Apple to suspend distraction control.
Workers near the Boeing 737 plant are picketing ahead of tomorrow's crucial vote. Some voiced pessimism about the company's new contract proposal. Take a listen.
Boeing workers striking outside the planemaker's 737 factory near Seattle on Monday were skeptical about a new contract offer that includes a 35% pay raise, casting doubt on whether a crucial vote this week will end a costly 5-week standoff. Boeing says it looks forward to its employees voting on the proposal on Wednesday. However, some of the 33,000 workers on strike were pessimistic.
I have seen the new contract. It's looking better, but it's it's not quite there. I'm kind of, if it passes, I'm okay, but I don't think it's gonna pass.
I think it's a decent contract, but I think it's not what we asked for, and I feel like the contract, it's not going to push the company forward for longevity in the long run.
The striking workers make up 95% of the company's machinists. The union has been seeking a 40% pay hike and a pension workers lost in 2014. Boeing's latest offer on Saturday includes a $7,000 ratification bonus, reinstated incentive plan, and enhanced contributions to workers' 401ks. But the proposed pay rise falls short at 35%. The union's leaders caught flack from members for agreeing to an earlier proposal that its members opposed. It's not explicitly endorsed the company's latest offer, only telling members over the weekend it was worthy of your consideration. Analysts estimate the wage hikes may cost Boeing $1 billion or more. And even if union members accept the new contract, the plane maker faces the challenge of ramping up production to pre-strike levels once workers return. The strike has halted production of Boeing's best-selling 737 MAX jets as well as 2 of its wide-body models. Company shares rose 3% on Monday on hopes for an agreement. Wednesday's vote coincides with Boeing's third-quarter results, which are expected to show a significant loss.
Walt Disney just announced that James Gorman will serve as its next chairman of the board starting next year, and that a new CEO will be appointed in 2026. Here are the details.
Walt Disney has named former Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman as chairman and said it would appoint a new CEO in early 2026. The announcement sets the stage for succession at the storied media and entertainment company. Gorman served as CEO of Morgan Stanley for 14 years and orchestrated a succession plan there in which all 3 candidates remained with the company. He'll become chairman of the Disney board in January after he steps down as executive chairman of Morgan Stanley. Since August, he has been leading the committee looking for a successor to Bob Iger, who returned as the company's CEO in 2022 to replace his hand-picked successor Bob Chapek. Iger is credited with building out Disney's media empire, including through the high-profile acquisitions of Pixar, Marvel, and Star Wars, and has seen his retirement date extended 5 times. Iger had initially planned to stay for 2 years after coming out of retirement, but agreed to extend his tenure through 2026. Shares of Disney were down fractionally in Monday morning trading.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.